Are we on the brink of World War III? The recent Iranian attack on Israel has sent shockwaves across the globe, igniting fears of a catastrophic global conflict. With the US, Russia, China, and other major powers potentially getting involved, the stakes have never been higher. But hold on a sec. Are we missing something here? Is there more to the story than meets the eye? Stick around as we dive deep into the facts and separate truth from speculation. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to the Muslim Podcaster Show. I'm your host Majid, and today I'm joined by my guest, co-host, Brother Cam from Votu. Assalamu alaikum, brother, and welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah for inviting me.
So, bro, what I'm going to do is throw you straight into the mix, yeah?
Yeah.
Obviously, if people are not aware, I think it's probably worth giving a bit of context of what we're talking about, right? So we're talking about how a couple of weeks ago, the Israelis, they bombed the consulate, Iranian consulate in Damascus, killing some high-level people, actually. One of the guys, the general, I don't know his name, he was actually quite tight with Ali Khamenei, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei of Iran. So it took a little while. Everyone's wondering what's going to happen. How is Iran going to react? And then we saw how Iran reacted a few days ago with, over 300 devices used, missiles, drones. Obviously, the claim is that 99% of everything was shut down. However, the point is that's what happened. Now, since then, we see that allegedly the Israelis fired back at Iran. Okay. So what's happening is many people now are thinking, well, is World War III around the corner? But also, others are saying this is nothing but theatre. That's the backdrop. So throwing you straight into the mix, Cam, are we close to World War III? And whatever your answer is going to be, what's your reasoning?
Exactly. Okay. I think it's an interesting question because that's what's sort of being played out in media. As we're on the brink of, some lunatic about to launch nuclear strikes on Israel, right? So that's what they're sort of basing it on. There's a bit of credibility in that World War III could happen over something very small, right? Because even if you look at the previous world wars, they happened on the back of actions that weren't, expected. They were sort of minor in the sense, and then it just bruised from that. So, it's basically reactionary till it becomes everyone's involved and everyone's now firing at each other, and there's major global outcry. So world wars don't happen overnight. They are sometimes you can't actually even put a finger on when World War I and II happened, because people argue over the starting points, because there's so many actions that happened before that. So who knows, because World War III, even if it happens in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you might come back to this point and say, oh, could it have been from this point? You see what I mean? It's very theory. So you don't know what starts it. It's not like an overnight trigger, unless someone just launched a nuclear missile for no reason, like North Korea or something. Then then you could say that was the start. But in this scenario, there's a lot of theater being played out, in my opinion. We've seen, obviously, Iran's rhetoric being that it's purely a reaction to the embassy attack and nothing to do with, well, actually, they were saying, obviously, it's also to do with the genocide in Palestine. But from the action and how quickly the missiles stopped overnight as well, saying, we've now finalized our strike, essentially as a reaction to the embassy missile, proves that actually, no, it wasn't to do with Palestine, because the missiles would have continued if it was to do with Palestine, and until the genocide stops. A bit like how Houthis have basically been given everything by the Americans. The Americans have tried to almost bend over backwards. Actually, they have bent over backwards to stop the Houthis from doing what they're doing, and they've turned around and said, no, not until the genocide in Palestine stops, then we'll stop. So there's a difference between their action and Iran's reaction. So in my opinion, World War III is not around the corner because of it being a theater. However, we have actually a more unhinged, unpredictable state, which is the state of Israel. Actually, America are more worried about them rather than Iran. They're actually more confident with Iran's reaction. They actually were in touch with them 72 hours beforehand. They were in touch with them throughout it. They knew where these missiles were going to land. That's why they intercepted them on purpose, because Iran didn't want it to cause global outcry and actually cause a lot of damage, which then would force World War III. So they were Iran were happy to talk to the UK and US and other partners to say, this is where our missiles are going to go and land, intercept some of them, and then maybe they showed a bit of the big guns at the end just to prove that actually we have got a bit of firepower. It's not purely just a show. If you do mess with us, we have got bigger weaponry we could use. So there was a bit of both. I think you couldn't say it's all in collusion with the UK and US what they did, but there was definitely a big part of it was in collusion with them in terms of not letting the missiles hit too devastatingly on Israel, because like we said, it would cause a reaction from Israel, and then it would be tit for tat, and you don't know where that could lead. So to me, it's purely theatre at the moment. Even we've seen Israeli response being what Ben Gavir has mentioned being a very, I can't remember the wording, but he basically said there was a weak response.
He said lame.
What did he say?
Lame.
Lame, yeah. And that was actually I think the Yair Lapid, the opposition, turned around and said this is one of the most insulting things someone's ever said, because you can't talk about your own state being, doing a lame response. So yeah, there's obviously a lot of friction internally. The right wing want to go all out war, and the left wing, as well as America, don't. They want to contain it. So we've got a more unhinged state on the other side, in quotes, which America are worried about, and that's why there's this gameplay being played, and people are really confused. Is America supporting Israel? Are they not supporting Israel? Nobody really. Actually, if you're not politically aware, if you're not watching the situation, you'd be very confused, because at one hand they're giving you weapons, on the other hand they're slapping you around the face. So it's very confusing, and I think we mentioned on the last podcast as well. That's probably my thoughts on that at the moment.
Exactly, bro. No, I thought you've made some really interesting points, because I like how you mentioned whether we're close to a world war, but in reality, it doesn't take much for world wars to begin. I mean, especially if you think about World War One. I mean, in the history books, they link it to the assassination in Sarajevo. Who would have thought that would have caused a world war? However, there are people who say, well, to be honest with you, this is something which the leaders wanted, and there's more of a conspiracy to it. I'm not saying it's not correct, because when you do think about a global war based on just one guy being killed, but maybe those days, you had all these treaties with countries, like defense treaties, and it's the same thing where, just say things kicked off here with Iran, and then the likes of Russia, China, the UAE, who got security pacts, and we've seen what the Jordanians did. The Americans would definitely get involved. The British would get involved. It can escalate. So that's actually, that's a good way of looking at it. But you mentioned theater. Okay, so just to clarify, when you're saying theater, especially, let me ask you from the Iranian point of view. Are you saying basically theater where the attack was done in a way to in a theatrical way rather than in a damaging way for their own reasons? Or theater in the sense like actually all of these nations, whether it's the Israelis, whether it's the Iranians, they all colluded together to stage this.
Yeah.
What do you think?
So actually, if anyone's watched the recent interview with Piers Morgan, I can't remember the professor.
The Iranian guy was solid, man.
Yeah, and he lays it, but actually, yes, it was a theatre in a sense that they used old missiles, they used all old weaponry, and they left a couple of the big guns till last, just to, and they're the ones that didn't get intercepted actually, and actually hit the military targets, even though there was minimal damage, which we know they wanted it to happen minimally, but at least land. So there's an element of theater there, and that's why the Iranians and the population and stuff were so happy about it, because it wasn't a case of, oh, they wanted every single bomb to land and wipe Israel out. It was more of a case of, look, even our small missiles depleted your your Iron Dome and caused you almost to use 70% of your budget for the month in overnight. So if we wanted to continue, we almost threatening them to say, if we continued, you'll be gone in a couple of days. Especially if we used our big missiles. So, and when we talk about a theater, we need to talk about in the context of what is Iran's interest in this. Iran is not a state that claims to be the Islamic state that protects all Muslims. They are a nationalistic state that care about Iran, right? And they will always have. And that's why even this attack was specifically to do with the attack on them, as well as actually it's a response to even if you think a few months back, the funeral attack, which ISIS claimed, Iran said, actually, it wasn't obviously ISIS, it was American intelligence, but we know whenever ISIS claim it, it's usually American intelligence. And there was a lot of Mossad involvement in that as well. So they came out and said, we don't believe any of this, what ISIS are saying. So we are going to respond. And they never responded to that really after this point. So this was also a response to that. Obviously, they've been getting attacked as their proxies getting attacked as in Hezbollah in Lebanon. So there's been a lot of almost like public opinion in Iran, which is saying, you guys are weak. Look, these lot can come out and just attack us anywhere and you're not doing anything. So they needed to show their population. This is again a nationalistic way of looking at it. They needed to show their population that they're not weak. They can hold up their own. So that's why we say theater, because we have to remember it in the context of Iran's interest. Iran's interest is Iran, similar to all other countries at the moment. And this is why the Muslims are so, I guess, pent up in rage and anger in every single country, is because we all have the same issue. All our leaders are only thinking about their own borders and themselves and their own pockets, whereas the Muslims are saying, unite, do anything you can to take out this entity. So yeah, that's sort of the reasoning behind the word theater. But yeah, there was definitely, like we said, collusion, and there was definitely also an element of don't mess with us. We have got bigger weapons that we can use. And actually, I think yesterday or the day before, America have been contacting the Iranian embassy. I can't remember where it was. I think it might have been Washington, where they requested that Israel do a symbolic strike. So they said, okay, let them at least do a symbolic strike, just so Israel can save face as well. And Iran turned around and said no. And so if this was purely collusion, they'd say, yeah, let them have a symbolic strike. Let's all just push it under the rug after that. But you can see this, Iran are still annoyed. They're not. It's not just you can walk all over us, and that's why they're playing a very fine line with Iran. And this is why Israel are using Iran. The other thing is we need to also remember the struggle between America and Israel is quite considerable. This is probably the biggest rift they've ever had in the history of Israel. So we need to understand that. And that's why Netanyahu and Ben Gvir and his right wing are doing everything to escalate it, while America are doing everything to de-escalate it, to the point, like we said, about the concessions to Houthis, the concessions to Iran. Even this sanctions are going to be probably minimal because Iran played ball and said, okay, we'll strike, but it won't damage them as much. There'll be a lot of concessions being made there by Americans. Okay, we'll make sure that we have to give sanctions because in front of the entire world, we need to look like we are the police, right? And we're the peacemakers. But we'll see that it won't be very.
Bro, I think you cut off for a moment there. So I think your screen froze. Also, you can see my ring light is decided to go kaput. So yeah, repeat that point again, please.
Yeah, I think it's probably the Zionist trolls attacking us. No, but I was just saying that actually recently the Americans went to the Iranian embassy and requested that Israel do a symbolic strike. So to save face on from Israeli perspective, that they need the Israelis want to respond, right? And what the Israelis are using as their trump card is saying, okay, if you don't let us respond, then support us in the Rafah invasion. So now America has to choose between Israel responding to Iran and causing a major escalation to the point they can't protect them from all these missiles, or allow them to do a Rafah invasion, which they also don't want, because that's going to also cause uproar across the Muslim world, and we don't know where that could end, as well as it potentially could end with the complete expulsion of all Palestinians from Gaza. So America are being completely played by Israel at this point. Not completely. There's tit for tat. Basically, they're both showing their guns, and we're not sure what's going to happen. So yeah, they wanted to allow Israel to have a symbolic strike recently, and that was purely to save face. And what did Iran say? They turned around and said, "No, no way. You can never. If you have a symbolic strike, we're going to strike back with even, like we've promised, even more real weaponry, because the previous one was just our old stuff that will never end up using. You know, so." It's interesting to see that perspective between Israel and America having a bit of a friction with each other, and then Iran being used as the bogeyman for America, in a sense that America saying, look, Iran are unhinged, are untapped, they are the source of all evil, they cause all of the terrorism around the world. But in fact, in reality, they know they don't, because they trust Iranians' response more than they trust Israel's response, who's meant to be their biggest ally, right? So it's quite funny how it's being played out, and I think that's why we say it is a bit of a theater, but it's also there's an element of fear from America's perspective that they can't contain what Israel are going to do, because they're basically playing on their survival instinct right now. Especially Netanyahu, he knows he's going straight to jail as soon as martial law ends. They're in martial law. Under martial law, and government officials and members cannot go to prison or even go to court. As soon as martial law is lifted, because the war is pretty much over, he's going to be in court the next day. So he knows he needs to continue. He needs to continue this war for his sake, at least.
Yeah, and I think an interesting point you mentioned, in regards to Iran and it being basically like a nationalistic entity.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at the Iranian state, and to be honest with you, even throughout the period of the Islamic State, I think they had issues with the Iranians or Persians, if that's what you want to call them, especially after Shah Ismail kind of like converted the country into Shiaism. But not even from the Shia point of view, the Iranians, because they had a rich and, let's be honest, glorious history before Islam, it seems like they never really were able to let go of this. So what you see is that, the Safavids who were around, who were a big obstacle to the Ottomans and them going further into Europe, these kind of like empires or states, even though they were Muslim, Shia Muslim, right? A lot of their, kind of like symbolism and a lot of their identity was actually taken from like pre-Islam, in a sense, where the previous nation of the Persians, the superpower.
Yeah.
So if you look at it from that point of view and you look at the current state in the same light, Iran, if you're thinking about it from the old Persian Empire, all these areas was at one point under its control, right? So it would see this area as its backyard, okay? And to them, there's a power balance issue with, just say, the state of Israel. So there's a nationalistic issue there, and also they understand that this is just an aircraft carrier for the Americans. They obviously don't want American influence in the region because they want to be the ones who are influential, right? So that's important to mention, and that kind of disconnects it from, like you were saying earlier on, that they did this for Gaza. Now, if you think of it in that respect, a lot of people were saying actually this attack benefited Netanyahu and it benefited Israel and other aspects. And if you think about it, from the Iranian point of view, I think this was to save face. Yeah, without a doubt, it was to save face. They needed to do something, right? Especially if you try to show that you're, a powerful
Yeah.
country, also to your proxies to show
Mm.
that we've got your back, Big Brother's got your back.
Mm.
If your consulates are getting flattened and you don't do anything,
Yeah.
right? Well, how does that, reflect your power, right? Then some people are saying it benefited Netanyahu because for many reasons. They say, A, it put Gaza on the back burner, okay?
Mm.
Whatever your opinion on that, I'll take that. Like, now no one's speaking about what happened at Al Shifa, no one's speaking about what's happening now. And every day there are Muslim and Palestinian Muslims being killed every single day, right? No one's
Mm.
really much talking about this because they're talking about possibility of World War III.
Mm.
Also, and it's an interesting point, is what some analysts are saying, actually, um, where the state of Israel and its government were under increased pressure over the
Mm.
last couple of weeks because of what they had done with the World Central
Yeah.
Kitchen and stuff like this. Now all of a sudden they're the victim again, right?
Mm.
So all
Mm.
these
Mm.
countries that previously were debating whether they should stop sending weapons, right, selling weapons and all this, yeah. Now it's the case. Well, oh, actually no, they need it because Iran's going to attack them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah. Yeah.
softens the blow a
Good point.
little, right?
Yeah.
Then from America's point of view, you can link it to that. The fact that there's big discussions about whether they should send these, billions of dollars to the Israelis. Like some of the Democrats have been saying, look,
Yeah. Yeah.
you can't have a blank check.
Mm.
However, they passed it a few days ago based on what did Biden say? This is
Mm.
to stop the Iranian aggression.
It's a good
So,
point. Yeah.
so all of a sudden it ticks boxes. However, I think the point which is interesting is it still isn't a collusion with everyone. There is still this
Yeah.
rift between the Iranians
Yeah.
and the Israelis. I think that's genuine.
Yeah.
Um, and the Iranians had to do this, and maybe this is the reason why. And goes back to your point about who the real troublemaker in the region is. That why did the Israelis attack the consulate? They would have expected, would have expected a response.
Definitely. Yeah.
So think about all these things that I just mentioned to you, which are tick boxes.
Mm.
It's very possible that they were sitting around their war cabinet and they said, actually, we're under this pressure. We need to alleviate this. How?
Mm.
If we attack Iran's consulate, then this is going to happen. And it's not rocket science to think
No.
what's the world opinion is going to change. Not world opinion, because I think people still are not stupid, but the
Yeah.
governments, they can at least appease their own people by saying, well, look,
Yeah.
we need to protect them, the only sole democracy, against the Iranians.
Yeah. 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 No, it's really, really top points actually. That's yeah, because even the bill to pass in terms of the military, I think 10 billion or something like that,
It
was
was more
being
than that.
held
It's
back. Was it more than
was it
10?
12 or was it? I think it might be 12 billion or might even
Yeah,
be
quite a
20,
lot.
20 something.
Yeah, it was a considerable, massive aid package, and it was held up in Congress for a long time, for at least a week or two before this, not being passed, and especially with the Rafah invasion on the cards and them saying, okay, we're not going to do it. They thought, okay, let's not. They don't need this money. But now, yeah, like I see, overnight they're like, yeah, well, they need it. They need it to protect themselves. So it served so many purposes for Israel, and it reminds you obviously of the verse of the Quran when Allah Subhanahu wa Taala says, translation of the meaning, when it said to them, "Do not spread corruption on earth," and they say, "We are but peacemakers." It's almost word for word. I can't remember who was it that said
Is that Isaac Herzog,
Herzog, yeah. He came out and he
president?
almost said it word for word. Like, oh no, we only want peace. We don't want war. Like, it's so like telling when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already mentions this sort of stuff in the Quran, that we will expect people like this to come out brazenly and say we want peace when they're the ones killing innocents without a second thought. So yeah, definitely. The other thing also to note is a consular attack isn't normal, right? Even when states were in war, attacking each other's territory, because we're saying it's part of your territory, your consulate is part of your territory in these countries. It's more than that, because even in war times, people wouldn't attack consulates, even if because they have every right. If it's your territory, go attack the consulate, right? But even in war times, I think I can't even remember in World War One or Two it happened, where the consulate. I think it might have happened in World War Two, but it was very like it's rare. It's something that just doesn't happen.
I
It's
think
like
it's
red
similar
line.
to when some diplomats from warring nations visit. You're not
Yeah,
supposed to kill them.
yeah, exactly. Messengers, and back in the day, like we saw, as the messengers, you wouldn't kill them, They'd at least have that sort of what they call it, diplomatic immunity. But yeah, that's why it was so like taken aback. Even David Cameron, when he was questioned, to the point the interviewer turned around and said, "Okay, what would happen if the UK embassy got flattened?" And he's like, "Oh, we would make a strong response." Or isn't that what Iran did? And yeah, they're just absolutely gobsmacked with the actions of Iran. So I think you're right. It was definitely forward planning from Israel. It was a masterstroke in that sense from their case, because they achieved so many objectives. And now look at it, they may potentially have the support of America for the Rafah invasion, which then also falls in line with the Israeli plan to get rid of all Palestinians. So they potentially push them towards Khan Yunis and then towards the port, which they're building as well. So you can see the way it's playing out. They're just trying to move that millions of, I think, however many million, about over 1 million, isn't it, now left in Rafah at the moment?
About 1.5,
Yeah, because a lot of the northern population went there as well, and just push them towards pretty much push them towards the sea, essentially. And then once this port is built, who knows what will happen after that? So it's going towards Israeli plan, and it sort of shifted overnight from the two-state to Israel, then to two-state to Israel. So there's a lot of toing and froing in terms of America and Israel. So it's one to definitely watch out for. But I don't think World War III definitely isn't on the horizon, especially with these bordering Muslim nations with leaders that you can't even call Muslim these days. So in terms of their actions, look at what Jordan and Saudi and stuff did when Iran were firing missiles. They opened their airspace and helped protect Israel, clearly. And it's sickening. But when you've got that sort of stuff happening, you almost wonder, okay, is the whole world is against the public at the moment in terms of the leaders around the whole world? The public want one thing and the leaders in the whole world want something else. So yeah, until there's at least a couple of sincere leaders that would support the right action, you can't see World War III happening. They're all in collusion. They're not collusion. They're all in agreement with the status quo because they want to keep their seats.
Yeah, I think ultimately, from what you're saying, I think what's important is what it really shows is how important the Americans and the West value this aircraft carrier in the Muslim lands. Because ultimately, if you think about it, these Israelis, they are taking the mick. I mean, they're putting the Americans in such a position because they're making them look stupid, because even that vote in the UN about having Palestine as a full member of the UN, right? You would think, okay, the Americans promote two-state solution.
Yeah.
Here's our thumbs up. They had to veto it.
Yeah.
So people are saying, wait a minute, you're the one that's saying the two-state solution is your solution.
Yeah.
And this is in recognition, but you have vetoed against it. And then obviously with the US, the UK abstaining. And then at the same time, they are sending this money. Then at the same time, they're trying to ease the tensions. They're having to go and shoot these, drones in the sky. Use their weaponry, and it's just a mess. And it really, and we've said this, I think, for months now, they are saving Israel from Israel.
Yeah, they are.
Right?
They are.
They are, but what it shows is look at the value. Look at the value of having this, Crusader kingdom within the heart of the Muslim lands. Because ultimately, if you think about it, they know that. Look, if these people regroup, right, they have the potential through their Islam, through their populations, through the ability. Just look at Palestine. Just look at Gaza. In Gaza, bro, how many dentists, doctors, professors just come from a place where they can't even leave that land? The people have so much potential. Imagine now these Arab nations and these Muslim lands with all their intellect, all their, quality come together. It will be unstoppable with their iman. Unstoppable. That's how that's how much value. And that's why, if you think about it, this attack really showed that the Kufaar, they will support and defend each other. I mean, these guys are bombing Gaza, we can't do anything. What we can do is let's drop some aid from the sky, yeah, which effectively kills some people or goes in the sea where people drown, right? That's their token gesture. But when it came this time around, they went and, you know, supported them fully, stop
Yeah.
these drones and whatever. You know,
Yeah.
it goes to show
Crazy.
that they won't stop. They won't wait around for some sort of resolution. They will jump in to aid each other because they know what's at stake.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's another verse of the Quran in Surah Maida where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Oh believers, take neither Jews or Christians as guardians because they are guardians of each other." So this is clearly showing even the whole world that they are guardians of each other. Why are we taking the UN and going to the UN and crying to the ICJ and things like that for help when in fact these are all their Western institutions that are there to protect each other themselves, not the Muslims. And it's all playing out now. Look, what was the ICJ trial? What is it now? Like whatever happened since that is the same, if not more.
Worse, bro, worse.
Worse. So, it's just a farce. It's just become a joke now.
Bro, you mentioned the David Cameron stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you talk about self-defense, right? So the Iranian consulate was bombed. The Iranian consulate.
Yeah.
Now, it seems like if you're not white,
Yeah.
you're not Anglo-Saxon, right? European, or hold a certain viewpoint,
you have to just take it.
You have to just take it because they can't defend themselves. However, so let's think of a scenario. So you're in a playground and there's a kid who gets bullied, right? One day that kid fights back, but you support the bully for his right of self-defense. Ultimately, that's how it is.
Yeah, that's what it is.
This whole Gaza thing, bro, the moral compass, right, of the West, they have no ground to stand on when it comes to freedoms, when it comes to human rights, when it comes down to any sort of international principle. It's all bogus and there to see. The fact that, even using their logic, the Iranians were defending themselves. Even that Sky interview, it was wicked. That Kay Burley, she put him on the spot. Well, wait a minute. And look, it's such a stupid response, but it was the type of response. They sent 300, whatever. Okay, wait a minute. So we're still using this self-defense issue. For 75 years, Muslim Palestinians' lands have been taken back. When are they going to get the right to self-defense?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Would you not say 7th of October was part of self-defense? So, why is that such a big?
And that's why I think that Iranian guy on that Piers Morgan show, I thought his interview was fantastic.
Yeah, he handled it perfectly. And the fact that he just turns around and calls him a liar doesn't play into his demands of condemning. He just says, "You're a liar," and just repeat you're a liar because he is lying to everyone's face by claiming all of these beheadings and rapes and things like that where there's no evidence of. In fact, there's just so much to talk about. There's loads that we could go into that whole debate as well. But
I mean, he was good in the sense like he were having it.
He wasn't having it. That's how you needed to be on the. I think the previous ones were almost shocked by the way Piers Morgan just kept asking the same question until you say what he wants you to say. Whereas now people know what he's about. So when you go on there, you just expect it and you know how to deal with it. So you sort of give the other early Muslims that went on his show a bit of, I guess, benefit of the doubt now. So
yeah, man. Yeah, no, definitely, bro. So I think what's important, some of the key points that you've made is the fact that one thing for sure that this attack wasn't in response to Gaza. Had it been in response to Gaza, I think the Iranians would have launched this attack on October the 7th.
Yeah.
Not a wait for these people. And I watched a video yesterday and of these. I'm sure they were dead children. I couldn't even look at it properly, man. Where they were just on the rubble and they were being pulled out, and it's just heartbreaking. If you've been keeping up with the news, daily, there's been killings where there was one where the children were just playing like the table football.
Oh, it was foosball. Yeah.
Foosball, and they were killed. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and they had to. I think Instagram even censored sky because
Yeah, no, bro, you can't. I mean, it's difficult in it, but I think, you know, I think that's important to put into context. There is games, political games being played, but ultimately it's not for Gaza because Gaza is still occupied. For people hoping to think that Iran is going to come to the rescue, that's not the case. And another lesson we can take from this really is the fact that, from a military point of view, I don't think the Muslims can rely on these nation states to come to their aid. They will only react when it's either in their own interests or to actually shamelessly defend the Zionist state. And there's another question. I'm not going to bring it up, and I think we should record a podcast on this one, Kam. And I'd like you to be on this, yeah, because I'd ask you the question that, the current the military institutions in these Muslim lands, should Muslims have any hope in these, or should we look elsewhere? Now, I don't want you to answer that question because
it'll be a good podcast. Yeah,
it will lead to a different episode, right? But I think it's important because we're looking to these armies, and I think there's more of a case to say, well, you know what? In reality, when there has been issues being caused against the American or the West interest, it's not by these militaries; it's by independent people.
exactly.
But we can leave that. But I got one last question.
Mm.
One last question before we end, yeah, and that is: do you still think, though, theater apart, we have that another milestone has been achieved, that there has now been a direct attack after decades and decades by a nation directly on Israel? I mean, I mean, you got to think this, you're looking at, I mean, I don't know, I'm giving myself thumbs up, right? but who would have thought that?
Yeah, no, actually, that's a good question because the literally overnight when it was happening, the first comment I made on social media was that I know it's a response and it's going to be just a safe face response, but the impact of this and this will go down in history as the first time any nation has directly attacked Israel with weapons that actually will do harm. It's not okay. Even though most of them were intercepted, they did show the big guns at the end. But it wasn't just a skirmish on the border with Hezbollah, which happens all the time. This was a real state versus state attack. And that's a major shift from Western policy. Like, the Americans would never have wanted that to happen. That's not something.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
Do you think the Americans would ever even want this notion to exist, that a country can directly attack?
That invincibility element was shattered again because who protected them? The US and the UK. Iron Dome would never have been able to stop that many. So that invincibility was shattered. The population now realized that they can fight back if they wanted to, and that if they were to be attacked now, that they can give an even bigger response. And that's the fear now. That's the major fear for the West, is that fact that Iran have the possibility to attack again if Israel now do something stupid, and they can't contain what Israel are doing at the moment. So that's why this whole scenario was not part of the playbook. I would say this was purely something, and that's something refreshing we can take as a first step. Maybe, okay, we all want the final step, which is just liberation.
I think it's important, bro, to explain what you mean by final step, because you know how people will change that, they'll misinterpret that to the final solution.
Final, which is what I'm talking about. Essentially, the final solution will be the liberation of Al-Aqsa. But
but the final solution, well, that's used. That term is linked to like eradication of the Jews. That's
is it?
Yeah, that's what I mentioned.
It is a final solution.
Yeah. So we're not talking about final solution here.
No. Well, people just need to look back at history. The Jews had the golden era during the time of the Khilafah. So the Muslims were actually the best people for the Jews to live under. And people are a bit, they'd be stupid to think that the Muslims are calling for the extinction of all Jews. It's not the case. We just want liberation of our lands and the protection of the Muslims, and so yeah, that's my point on that really. I've not got much else more to say on that, but
Yeah, bro.
yeah,
No, no,
I
no.
think
That's
it's definitely something to look forward to. Something not look forward to, but in a case of something to see as a positive step that we can. And Israel isn't invincible. It isn't this god in the region almost where nobody can touch. They've got a shield over it. It's almost like a metaphorical shield in the Middle East that nobody can hurt or touch or even retaliate against. So it really has created that retaliation aspect of if they do something, we can do something back, which wasn't the case before. You could never retaliate. You just get your hands or wings clipped off by the UK and the US if you
bro.
tried to.
They've been bombing Iranian targets in Syria and places like that for years now.
And they've not, yeah, exactly,
They've
and they've
never
not even
responded.
retaliated
But no,
against.
I think it's an interesting point, and I don't. I think it's far fetched to think that the Americans gave the Iranians the green light just to bring the Zionists, back in line. There could be that angle in the sense, like because as you can probably you've seen the videos where all these Zionists were at the airport trying to leave, right?
Yeah,
Because as soon as they realize that their this massive settlement where they're living in can no longer exist,
mm,
they will jump back onto their planes because they all got
definitely.
dual
Yeah,
citizenship.
yeah,
They've all come from somewhere else, right?
yeah, yeah,
They can go back. So as long as that security element is there, they will stay there. But as
yeah,
soon as that security element is gone, and I think, you know, another tick maybe for the Americans is the fact that if the normal population in Israel link
yeah,
the threat of security from the Iranians to the right wing government, then they can, vote them out and kick them out and try to bring some nation government in which is a bit more moderate. But we'll see, bro. We'll see, inshallah. But Jazakallah khair, bro, to
definitely.
for coming on and sharing your thoughts and your views. Any last comments before we end?
No, I just think the main key takeaways is that Muslims just see from this we can see that all the nation states today are not here for the Muslims; they're here for themselves, and we need to detach our leadership to any of these Muslim leaders. That if we have any, even look at the likes of Erdogan and stuff that's happening on that side. The trade agreements are still there, and there's oil and gas pipelines still flowing in the Middle East towards Israel. There's so much that's happening that could have been stopped. There's nothing sincere other than what I can see is from the Houthis. So, and then look at them; they are the only institute or military that are not. They were not the part of Sykes-Picot. Essentially, they were just um, essentially a militia, but
Militia, innit?
yeah, militia. So it's not a Western institutionalized army, and they're the only ones that are actually doing something. So yeah, we need to detach our loyalty. I think that's the main thing we take from this is detach our loyalty. We can't look to the armies. Look at what the armies would do. They were there to protect Israel, and we really need to make change on the ground ourselves.
Yeah, 100%, bro. I second your thoughts there, and just to quickly add to it is this change you're talking about. I think people have to be patient. Probably patient isn't the right word. Steadfast in the sense, like this may be something that doesn't happen overnight, um, but we need to keep at it. I think ultimately things have happened since October the 7th, which the West, certainly America, would not have liked to happen. So,
Mm,
when people sometimes elevate the United States to this almost godlike, you know, level where they control every single thing in the world, that's not the case. Allah
mm,
is the best of planners, right? And
yeah,
I think um, things have happened which have damaged plans that the Americans have had. And you never know, maybe we're never going to get to go back to a world which is exactly the same as it was post pre October the 7th. However, the change has to happen because Gaza is still suffering, Sudan is still suffering, Kashmir is still suffering. Muslims, if you speak to Muslims from India and they are talking about how worried they are with the general elections coming up, Muslims are suffering everywhere.
mm,
And what this has demonstrated is even if somebody did have a hope in their nation states and in their leaders, this Gaza has been a Furqan, which was amazingly described very early on in the conflict, has exposed these nation states, has exposed these governments, has exposed the leaders, and Muslims really need to look to the Quran and Sunnah and look for solutions according to Islam. Bro, once again, Jazakallah khair for a very thoughtful podcast episode. I'm sure people have benefited. I certainly have. People can be rest assured. I don't think World War III, well, Cam doesn't think World War III is around the corner. But one thing you can do is certainly subscribe if you're new to the channel and share this, like the video and share it with your family and friends. And a big jazakallah once again to my co-host Cam. And until the next one, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.